Okay, good afternoon. I thought it might be interesting for me to discuss the journey of my practice towards working with concrete, because I actually trained as a ceramic artist, as you mentioned, under the guidance of Edmund de Waal. So I was tasked today with talking a bit about my work and trying to place it contextually. So I'm hoping that this description of the steps I took towards using concrete can articulate a new exploration and way of seeing this stunning and versatile material. So I have and still do make ceramic installations that translate scientific data of one which you see here, such as the DNA into a ceramic language that articulates identity as a macro, multifaceted construction, as well as having a microchemical essentialist foundation. So my work has taken the form of entire rooms made of handmade ceramics in little blocks and panels with grading shades of colour. Just trying to appear to be okay. So the texture of clay is pivotal in the undulating and turbulent formation of one's identity. So opposed to the smooth, singular, and sometimes overly reductionist tendencies of geneticists. So to briefly sum up, because we're here to talk about concrete, it's important for my journey that these ceramic installations try and capture the context or the whole picture, as well as the macroscopic nature of identity. So in hindsight, I've always been interested in the idea of revealing what lies beneath, and it's the reason why I've very infrequently used glaze in my ceramics, feeling that it was adding a layer or masking the true nature of the earth-like mineral, for better or for worse. However, I started to become interested in postmodern theory, and more recently post-human theory, whereby the idea of revealing a hidden meaning or an essential truth that lies deep within can be regarded as a Descartesian fallacy. So what's become apparent through modern science, to my understanding, is that, and I'm quoting a fabulous author on this subject matter called Tamar Sharon, and she says, all interior spaces are equally superficial, that depth is only latent surface. So the emphasis thereby being on surfaces, connections, networks, and fragmentation and decentralization. So the quest I have been on is to articulate this sentiment. So of surface, stripping back surfaces with ever finer resolution while still articulating the whole. So how can you, how can you actually do this and avoid the pitfalls of reductionism while still embracing it? So my answer, or perhaps way of conveying this, because there is no concrete answer, excuse the pun, was developed at my residency at C2D2, York University's art residency. And I was allowed to collaborate with the epidemiology department and their hematological malignancies department, i.e. a group who research the epidemiology of blood cancers. And it was here that I wanted to follow up on the idea of concrete cancer, an example of which you more or less see here, which is this is a picture of a harbour wall on Lundy Island. So concrete cancer is a bizarre but wholly appropriate anthropomorphized term of a material process. So symptoms manifesting as crumbling concrete and rust, leaching, and ultimately failure of the steel reinforcement. I love this image because actually it's nature producing anything better than I've ever produced anyway. So I was also inspired by the architectural work of the Swiss-based architects Guijon Gouillet, mentioned in Adrian Forty's fantastic book. And they pioneered this embedding of iron and copper into the actual concrete mix and matrix during the casting process of their concrete buildings. So this experimental technique revealed a playful way of the surface being identical to the inside, but also allowing it to become weathered and the exterior at the same time, or a new exterior as well. So it also lets concrete just be, having for many decades tried to simulate the aesthetic of other materials, broadly speaking. So my residency at York resulted in the Pathways of Patience, which was my first foray into concrete. And it's a diptych, of which you see the second part here, and it currently resides at York University. So this describes what the epidemiologist in the hematological malignancies department actually does, sorting through immeasurably complicated data. But also the work is an attempt to articulate socio-demographic differences of mortality rates with people with blood cancers. So despite occurrences being equal across the cohort of patients. So the rusted steel rebar spots that you see dotted at the top denote a patient when they are diagnosed with cancer, and the rust trail their subsequent patient pathways or outcomes. So you can see a polishing on the left, or refinement of the surface, where a patient's pathway is smooth and their pathway continues. You can see on the left the pathways continue. The pathways come to a halt at the right-hand side, where the concrete is rough and textured. So i.e. the patient, represented by the rust spot, pathway essentially dies. So the idea being, where the environment is smooth and polished or refined, the chances of survival are greater, and the reverse being true, the rougher the terrain, the survival decreases. So this piece has sent me off in a different trajectory and resulted in numerous installations and artworks that explore concrete's materiality and its relationship to the oxymoronic postmodern notion of interior surfaces. So I completed this piece, Matter in Grey, for Cambridge University Chemistry Health Department. It measures 20 metres by 2.5 metres, and it depicts the Chemistry of Health Department's goal of tackling protein misfolding diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. So the top row, believe it or not, depicts normal aging in relation to Alzheimer's or neurological decline. The second depicts Alzheimer's, and the third is Alzheimer's that's being treated, and the fourth is Alzheimer's that's being prevented. The ultimate goal and ambition of the Institute. So the rows are a series of gradated panels that incrementally shift in concrete composition, i.e. colour pigmentation from pink to grey, sand from fine to coarse, aggregates to recycled aggregates. And since Alzheimer's occurs because of misfolded proteins aggregating in the brain, the use of aggregates in particular and accumulation of recycled aggregates like crushed buildings, roads, old roads, etc., seems really symbolic and metaphorically apt. Another interesting addition in this piece is the use of self-healing concrete, which I'm hoping will interest the panel in relation to how the work will age and might be viewed in the future. So this is a calcite precipitating bacteria, which is embedded in the matrix of the concrete that springs into action when the pH level drops in its environment. So typically, I believe concrete has a pH value of 13 or 12.5 or thereabouts. And this bacteria kicks into action at roughly 10 to 11 pH, i.e. when water when there's a water ingress through cracks. So in effect, the bacteria in the concrete starts to produce limestone to reseal any cracks. So it's a wonderful invention that I was allowed to use by Henk Jonkers at TU, Technical University Delft in the Netherlands. And I used it here in the treated and prevented row, which contains small ceramic balls. And you can see on the left-hand side of the image, there are these very small black balls, that's light expanded clay. And it's saturated in a liquid solution containing the bacteria. So it's a lovely metaphor for treating Alzheimer's, because if these rows deteriorate, which eventually they will, I imagine, it will ensure that these panels will live longer. So a succinct parallel with the ambitions of the Institute. So a more recent body of work is called the Mutating Story, currently exhibiting at the wonderful New Art Centre, Roche Court in Wiltshire. So this comprises of 4 large concrete slabs constructed as you might construct a reinforced architectural wall panel, but made in the studio. Each panel weighs 1.2 tons, and the dimensions are 3 meters by 1 meter high by 8 centimeters thick. So quite large, but very slender. Each panel again grades in color and texture, and I've inserted blocks to denote where change has occurred on a cellular level. So each panel depicts change and the human instinct to abate change. And the change I refer to is cellular change, i.e. aging or cancerous change, but also more metaphorically change in general. So the panels are read from left to right in a temporal fashion. So the more time passes, the density of molecular change increases. The piece articulates through the use of aggregates, rust and steel, malign change and our attempts to delay it and eliminate it, fighting against the onslaught of atrophy. In a way, it is a contemporary stages of mankind. The paradox is the work is about change in a material that is synonymous with permanence or is culturally affiliated with enduring, despite its slow degradation and re-healing. So the issue I'm discovering only in hindsight is that in the revealing of the materiality of the work, I'm also partial to the reductionist tendencies of science, since the work is highly polished. So in order to polish the work, you start with a coarse grade and move to an even finer grade. So 30 grit all the way through to 60,000 grit in 9 incremental steps. So each step is a paring back and increasing the visual resolution of the concrete, revealing another layer until the work is like glass. So for me, I've achieved something quite bizarre. A glass-like surface, much like a glaze on ceramics, where I started initially, but one that doesn't coat the material, but one that magnifies the surface because it is the surface. The surface becomes the interior. So it is essential that I don't become too carried away by the allure of the glossy resolution and hopeful beauty of the polished minerals, and by creating these block-like outcrops or conurbations, the panels take on a cityscape or a battlefield, ensuring that a macroscopic viewpoint is always in view. So the concrete still maintains its architectural underpinnings. And you can see on the edge of the panel a sort of almost like a canvas, the tacks, but actually these are the reinforcement bars. So again, here the use of concrete for me becomes double-edged. What does it mean to use concrete in art? When the connotations of endurance and usage in the built environment tracks the huge carbon footprint of the material's production and its consequences on the longevity of our planet. A material that helps us survive and endure is also partly responsible for our potential environmental demise. So for me, this is the very reason to use concrete. It is highly symbolic of our struggle to survive. So perhaps to move away from myself, thankfully, and about time, the shift I see that has occurred, in particular into relation how concrete is used in turning forms. I hesitate to say that because I'll probably get shot down in a second, is the embracing of the materiality of concrete. So as we become more familiar and in tune with concrete's inherent structural and formal qualities, Adrian Forty, in his amazing book, again, Concrete and Culture, maps this transition wonderfully. No longer imitating other materials, here through, in this picture, of the economic necessity of the Barbican centres, concrete being pick-hammered to make it look like riven stone. Concrete is creating its own language. And Eleanor's mention of the rain dripping down, or the water dripping down the side of the Hepworth Museum, is very much in line with that new vocabulary. So its usage in memorials such as the Holocaust Memorial in Vienna is testament to its beautifully expressive casting qualities, at one moment embodying memory and the next obliterating it, having that dualistic dialogue that seems to be quite prevalent in other people's discussions. Anish Kapoor's Between Shit and Architecture, playing with the new printing techniques that seems to be taking over the engineering departments of universities. Here the concrete feels light, even like a wool being knitted, but the greyness retaining that traditional weight. So more than anything, the use of concrete today is a way for me to use an intuitively familiar material that is capable of embodying opposing ideas, meaning and material simultaneously meld, mutate, appropriate, and create. And I will conclude there.